Hello, today I'd like to talk about the process by which autoimmune disease develops. Following on from my previous blog, my post on the fundamentals, the structure of the immune system, we're going to go into a little bit more detail and look at exactly what goes wrong for the body to be able to make a so-called mistake and start developing a reaction to our own tissue, which is the basis of autoimmunity. The first thing that happens is that the barrier between ourselves and the outside world has to be breached. For something to come in for us to form any immune reaction against, whether appropriate or inappropriate, there has to be something needs to come in. For example, a virus or a bacteria needs to get through the skin, it needs to get through the respiratory membranes and into the bloodstream, or something has to go from within the lumen of the gut through the lining into the bloodstream. And when that happens, the immune system recognizes that something is here that shouldn't be here, and it starts taking action. So our first defense is the barrier. The skin on the outside of our bodies, or the lining of our nose, the throat, the respiratory membranes, or the lining of the gut, all the way down. All of these are an interface between us and the outside world, and most of our immune system is concentrated exactly at this interface, at this barrier. What would cause a breakdown of this barrier? It could be, in the case of the respiratory membranes, it could be pollution, it could be inhaled toxins such as cigarette smoke. In the case of the gut, there's usually a layer of mucus lining the gut, and that layer of mucus serves as our first defense. And that can be breached by stress. The first factor is stressed. So there's less mucus production when we are stressed, and the actual lining of the gut becomes permeable and it's easier for something to get through. It could be that we have a reaction to something from the outside, such as a food, which sets up an inflammatory process. So we're reacting when there's inflammation in the gut. Then the barrier is affected, it's broken down, the mucus layer becomes thinner, and it's easier for something to get through, an undigested food particle, for example, to get through and into the bloodstream. Now, usually inside the gut, we break down proteins into constituent amino acids. So proteins are very long strings of amino acids in a long chain. And this is broken down in the gut lumen into just the individual amino acids, which are transported through the gut lining and into the bloodstream. But if that barrier becomes permeable, if it allows bigger particles to get through, the immune system recognizes that as something which shouldn't be there. It's too long. It may be a 3 or 4 sequence amino acids. And then the immune system says, oh, we don't like the look of this, we'd better have a look. So in my analogy of the immune system, you may remember that the cells resident in our tissues and in the lining of the gut, we can compare to our police force. So they are always on the lookout for something. They don't have a particular problem, a particular pathogen or a particular suspect in mind. They're just keeping their eyes open, seeing that everything's going nicely, looking for any loiterers, guys hanging around, shouldn't be here. And when they see that, they start taking action. Our immune system works exactly like that. So the cells called the dendritic cells or the macrophages are our local police force. When they see something that shouldn't be there, they literally pick it up, they engulf the virus or the bacterium, and they go back to headquarters, to the local police station, and they present it to the staff there. So you may have then a fragment of protein or a virus or a piece of a bacterium which is taken to there. Now the immune system will also recognize a protein, because proteins aren't just a long string, but they are actually a complex shape. They're bent into a shape which has to conform to a particular configuration to be recognized either as self or non-self. So for example, you could have, this could be the normal shape, and the abnormal shape could just look like something like this. So there's just one little region which isn't as it should be. This is what the immune system will latch onto. It will say this isn't as it should be. Now the tissues of the body, the linings of arteries, all our cells, all our body tissues are made up mostly of protein, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of fat. Most of the immune system is primed to only recognize protein. So it only looks at the protein component. So when something is not in the right shape because it has been damaged, the immune system will still tag it. It'll still pick it up, put it in the back of the van, and carry it off to the local police station. Now, damaged proteins can happen due to an infection, literally where bystander damage. So in the process of killing viruses or bacteria or parasites, the cells of the immune system release very potent toxins to kill extracellular, outside the cell, pathogens, but in the process it damages surrounding cells of our own body. The immune system has to pick that up, see that those cells are damaged, and carry them off to the lymph nodes. It can also happen due to high blood sugar, where you get glycation of proteins, so that the actual structure of the protein is damaged, it changes the configuration, and the immune system will pick this up and start a process of inflammation against that perceived pathogen. So once the cells of the immune system, the dendritic cells, the macrophages, they carry these perceived threats, possible threats, back to the lymph nodes, a process is started where they present what they found to cells in the lymph nodes that are just hanging out there, and they present it on their own surface. It's like a little platter, a little place on the cell surface of this. Imagine I'm a macrophage and I'm presenting a little protein fragment to the guys in the headquarters, the immune cells hanging out there, and saying, look, I found this, I think we should look at this. And these cells then go, oh yes, that looks a bit suspect. Okay, we're going to take further action, or no, that's fine, it's no problem. This process of antigen, it's called antigen presentation, is very tightly regulated. So it's got three sides. You have the presentation of the antigen, the protein fragment. You have what is called co-stimulation. So the antigen presenting cell binds to the other cell in multiple places. And the third part, you have to have messengers of inflammation, they're called inflammatory cytokines. You may have heard of them in the context of our current pandemic, that are secreted by the immune system as a sort of you can think of it as a code that was sent out through the wireless system back to headquarters. When the suspect was picked up, there's a radio message going back to headquarters saying, by the way, we're coming in, we're bringing something in. There's a radio message being relayed. The immune system secretes its own version of that called cytokines. Those three factors, all three of them, the co-stimulation, the presentation, and the cytokines, have to be present. So you can think of this as either as the protein fragment can be either, here's the suspect. The co-stimulation can be, you can think of that as the report written out by the policeman. It's all filed in the proper channels. Here's my report. And the co-stimulation and the inflammatory cytokines is that message that was sent in we're bringing something in, start preparing. Now in that process, mistakes can also happen. If there's a background inflammation going around in the body, for example, you have an ongoing inflammatory process, inflammatory disease, even an autoimmune disease, then there's always a little bit of damage being done to tissues of the body, which normally the immune system takes care of. It says, no, even though this protein is not exactly the way it should look, we can still see that it's actually self-tissue, and we should not do anything about this. This is actually fine. Thanks for bringing it in. Everything's fine. And then the T regulatory cells dampen down the process and says, false alarm, don't worry about it. Thanks for bringing it in. The second problem that could be is that cells of the body have been damaged, and the immune system doesn't actually, because it's being presented with a bona fide, genuine suspect in terms of a virus or a bacterium, but at the same time it's getting a little bit of damaged self-tissue. They're being presented together. When that happens, the immune system can easily make a mistake and start reacting to a little fragment of self-tissue. It thinks it's only being given a piece of the suspect, but in fact mixed into there was a little bit of self-tissue, and then it starts making an immune reaction. You could also think of that as like the forensic guys have picked up a hair or a drop of blood or a little body tissue and brought it in and says, okay, this is what we need to look out for in future, but that sample got contaminated with an innocuous bit, and now suddenly the briefing is to look out for this part, which is actually self-tissue. And what happens then is there's a cloning, it's called a cloning of immune cells in the lymph nodes, and they are specialized cells. These guys are totally trained. They only go after one thing. They only go after that protein, which looks just like that. They get a thorough briefing. It takes 5 to 7 days, and they're told exactly what to go after. You can think of them as more specialized army troops, or even like the canine unit of the police force. So there's a presentation, and the dogs are brought in, and they say, you must go after this, but it's a contaminated sample, and they mistakenly also start going after something else. So when after 5 to 7 days they're launched into the circulation to go and seek that one thing, that one changed protein, they start going after that as well, instead of just looking out for the virus or the bacterium. And once that process starts, once those that they call T lymphocytes, once a mistake has been made, you cannot undo the mistake. You cannot that. It's almost as though there's no unwriting of the suspect profile. Once that is written, there will always be T lymphocytes. They're called memory cells. They stay in the lymph nodes. And whenever that particular antigen, that particular protein is presented to them, they start launching the immune attack. So, and then, which is perfectly appropriate when it is to a real outside threat, such as a virus, bacterium, a parasite. The problem comes in, of course, when there's a mistake and the immune system starts attacking the tissues of the joint, or the tissues of the gut, or the tissues of the lungs in an autoimmune process. Now this process cannot be reversed, but what you can do is you can change the circumstances, the whole background in which this process is happening. So you can take away all the non-purposeful inflammation that's happening in the body. For example, if you are reacting to something in your diet, gluten, which you are consuming on an ongoing basis, and you're always setting up inflammation in the gut, you are increasing the immune system is always on high alert. There's always this signal being sent back. Bzzz, bzzz. You know, the flashing lights, you can just imagine it. And so there's always this trigger happiness. So there's always going to be some troop somewhere who's a little bit trigger happy and too easily sets off a whole immune cascade. And if one guy starts firing, another guy is going to shoot out the tear gas, and suddenly you've got this huge escalation of reaction. So you're always trying to dampen that down to manageable levels by not consuming a trigger food, by looking at your stress levels, by sleeping enough, because sleep has a profound effect on the immune system. So one can manage many of the factors that conspire to potentiate the immune response, and to such an extent that in many cases it's possible to bring an autoimmune condition into remission. In other words, while you can never be cured, you will always have a propensity for the immune reaction, for that mistake to be perpetuated. You can bring it down to a level where you don't have symptoms or minimal symptoms by making changes in your diet and lifestyle. I hope you found this useful. Thank you so much for watching.